Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 8, Episode 26 of our weekly Q&A videos. If you're on YouTube and you check out the description, you can watch this, or listen to this, I should say, because there'll be no video component as a podcast. And we say this pretty regularly now, but it is my ideal way of getting content. And if you like listening to us but doing other stuff, checking this out on a podcast is a great way of downloading it and taking it with you, or doing something else on your phone at the same time as this is playing in the background. It really is, in my opinion, the best way to listen to long form stuff that you don't really need to look at a lot for.
Now, that being said, I will say that there is a bonus for people who are watching this as a video. At the end of this play video, I guess you could scrub ahead if you wanted to. It's the answer to what feels like the most common question, the most often asked question lately. And I'll let that be a surprise for when you actually see it.
So there we go. Getting into our questions for the week, the first one comes from Damon Targeryen, and they say, can you guys make ranking videos? Please, like top 5 best Batman, top 5 best Superman, top 5 Wonder Woman. And that was the comment. There's the show less. Okay. Because we expanded it.
So the first thing I want to say is it's interesting. Is there a limit a restriction in YouTube where you can't use the exact same letters for a name?
What? So
let's say somebody's already picked a name. Can you name yourself the same thing with the same letters or no?
I don't know right now. I'm assuming you can.
Because I know it was before, so it's interesting to me that when people make specific spelling choices.
Yeah.
So I learned not nearly as long ago as I think I should have, is that dictionaries used to be descriptive and not proscriptive. And that one of the funny things about Old English was that people could spell things so many different ways.
Yeah, they basically just spelled it however they wanted. It was really just phonetic spelling.
Right. Well, and what's funny is that that F's or S's looked like F's. And there's this funny song that I wrote that was spelled out in Old English style, and one of the words in the song was suck. So
oh my God.
It ended up being a little bit unintentionally for its future audience, a little bit more amusing than it should have been. No, the reason why I ask is because Targaryen, I see, what's funny to me is that because Game of Thrones was a TV show, people would hear the names all the time. So you'd spell it wherever. You'd have an idea because you might see the word in passing. But when you've read the book and it's like thousands of pages, then Daemon, it stands out to me, right? So Daemon to me is always Daemon.
Yeah.
Not Daemon so much as is Aemon. Right? Because I don't think it was Daemon Targaryen. It's Aemon. A-E-M-O-N. And Targaryen, there was a second A in it.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to me, like language and stuff.
I think people can do the same names, and I think that it's definitely been possible. I don't know if it's still possible. They might have stopped because I haven't made like a new YouTube account in forever. But I think because it's integrated with Google, right, and it's integrated with Google's like your sort of Gmail suite, right? Your Google account. And ever since they first integrated it with Google Plus, I know that it would, your name by default would just be whatever name you have for your Google, right?
Yeah.
Like what's supposed to be, I think, your actual name, and then you can change it, right?
Right.
And so I know that for that, you definitely, at the very least, you could just set your name, like a first name, no last name, or something like that, and then just set it to whatever. So I think you can. And in this case, anytime you see somebody where it seems like a first name and a last name, there's a decent chance that this is what their name is actually on their Google account that they're assigned into at this time.
And it strikes me actually that it's not like an intentional misspelling, right? That it's this is somebody whose name is Damon, and they wanted to make their name a little bit, not, I don't know, honestly funny, because that doesn't seem like the capture. When you want to make your name sort of a play, it's a fun name.
Maybe, or
with something that they like.
You just don't want your real information out there. If you're using this for like YouTube comments, maybe you don't want to put your first and last legal name on every comment that you post.
That's true.
Which would also be fair. So it's hard to say.
The question.
Yeah, can you make ranking videos?
It's interesting about this because I think if we were going to make ranking videos, like it's an interesting thing to say the top 5 Batman, top 5 is it Superman or Supermen's? Supermans?
It wouldn't be Supermen's. I'll tell you that.
Supermen or Supermans. And top 5 Wonder Women. Woman's. It would remind me of the frustration of, right now I'd be just happy with any content. But do you remember when new characters would come out and people complained that it was just a new skin and not a new character?
Yeah.
It seems so naive to think that there was, at some point, there's still going to be so much more stuff that we'd have some say in what was coming out. And it makes me sad. I know I'm laughing now, but I know that it would have been frustrating at one point to even think about making a video like that because of what it meant. And now I don't know. Is there because those kind of top 10 or top 5 or top whatever lists, right? Those listicles tend to be more clickbaity than anything else, right?
I'm not more clickbaity. They tend to attract more of a built-in audience. Well, the stuff that we do really isn't designed for anybody. I don't know who this content is for. But yeah, stuff that's more like list heavy, it does tend to be sort of that like, oh, well, I want to see what the list is. I want to see what like all of them are. And so I think it has an implication of being more bite-sized, but there's a lot of people who do list content that's actually like quite good. I'm thinking about video game list content. Like Outside Xbox is a channel that mostly does video game list content for the sort of like main stuff, and it's pretty entertaining, you know? Yeah. It's just that sort of, it's the stuff that's easier to get popular, and is more likely to pull in a click. Because it has something inherent, but we do almost the antithesis of that. So
Damon's actually in one way contributing to content by asking this question, in another way gently guiding us towards potentially more successful YouTube channel, which we refuse to. It's the river that we as horses refuse to drink from.
Yeah, it's not actually like the worst idea. If we could do justice to, if it was content that we wanted to make, having stuff in a list thing and having the title indicate that it's a list and that kind of thing. I mean, he's asking for it because he wants to see it, because, you know, people would watch it.
And he wouldn't be the only one that wanted to see it. Yeah, he wouldn't be. I guess the difficulty is whenever I hear an idea for video, what always occurs to me is what I imagine the video would look like.
Yeah.
And then I think, is that something that I could do or I'd want to do or do I have time to do? And I think in my mind, the way the video would look would be, this is why these characters go. This is how I rank them. I go from the lowest to highest. You know, like a surprise at the end, right? But it's not really, because at some point you reduce enough. There's not that many of each skin left. But then, and I think, okay, so I want gameplay of this character doing these things that I think are cool and demonstrating against this kind of opponent or whatever. And I think, oh my god, I can't do that.
Yeah, like that sounds like effort.
That sounds like more time than I have to work, because despite this being the pandemic, it's funny in some ways. I feel like I'm actually doing more work, even though I'm saving on commuting time for a lot of days. It feels like there's more of a struggle sometimes, and I'm starting a little bit earlier because I don't have to commute, and I'm working a little bit later because I think, well, I want to get this done, because if I don't get it done, I'll have to do it tomorrow, and I still have to, and I'm not commuting.
Yeah. I feel that exact way about school, where I feel like there is just like a little bit more for a lot of stuff, and without that separation, it's not actually as relaxing. And even if I would have to commute, and for like a non-insignificant amount of time, it was almost more pleasant to commute than it is to spend even like half as long, half of that time doing work, because it was a separation, and it was, you know, moving from one space to another. And I would listen to podcasts or music or whatever. And obviously, like, you know, being like on a bus doesn't have as many options for entertainment as like being at home, like on my computer.
Right.
But in terms of getting that like nice separation, I almost prefer it.
Yeah.
Like overall, it was a good balance to life.
So quick interjection before I completely forget, because I missed the point where I was going to point this out, is that despite this being Phantom Zone, in general, when we do these videos that are play, we try to get through as quickly as possible as a demonstration of the technique. You'll have noticed that at one point when Rebirth Raven had 3 bars of power, we tagged in Aquaman 3 bars of power specifically to do a super. And unfortunately, ours went first and then hers went. But the point of that was, I am on the hunt for simultaneous supers.
Just for fun?
Just for fun, just because it's cool. The idea is cool, and sometimes the video is cool, but it's not that cool when they don't have a lot of overlap. But when they do, it's actually really neat to see all that kind of weird action happening.
Like 2 animations going on at once, especially when they're all in the same sort of spot.
Yeah, and it's hard to get it just right, because you have to have a situation. So anytime there's a situation where I have 3 bars and they have 3 bars, I'm doing super, even though that's not the most efficient way to play it, even though I might have a chance to bring in Batman with Astro Harness and take no damage. I'm doing it because they're so rare. I think we've got footage of 4 different simultaneous supers. Mm-hmm. One looks spectacular. That's the New 52 Nightwing, and I can't remember which Bane, where they're both doing it at the same time. And the other ones, there's a little bit of overlap because the plane of where their supers happen are different. I think the programming takes into account where that is.
Yeah.
And you won't see both of them happen at the same time. Prioritizes yours, and you only see the other one at the moments where it's working at the same plane.
Yeah. The same spot.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I just want to point that out because people are going to think, well, they really don't know what they're doing. They're playing funky. And there's actually method to the madness.
And yeah, we don't know what we're doing. We are playing funky, but it's for content.
Yeah.
So I think that's the answer to that question, which is that we could, but it's not exactly our kind of thing. And
if you want to do it right, is the problem. I feel like if I'm going to be doing something like that, I'd want to put in the proper effort. It would feel really weird. Like this what we're doing now, there's not a lot more I think that we can do other than, you sort of go in knowing what it is. We're going to ramble a bit. We're going to answer some questions. We're going to talk about things that interest us.
Yeah.
And if it was going to be a top 5 or a top 10 or whatever, I'd expect more of it. Mm-hmm. And so I can't bring myself to make something less.
Yeah. So there we go. Our next question comes from Sonic Nicholas 1995, and they say, are there any mobile games you are interested in playing? For me, I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links as well as Sonic 1 and Sonic 2.
I'm not surprised. Their name is Sonic Nicholas.
Yeah. And so, you want to answer this first?
Yeah, the only mobile game I'm playing right now is Words with Friends.
Yeah. And I do play different stuff at different times. I bounce around. One game that I'm playing right now that I'm having kind of a surprising amount of fun with it's either Archer of God or Arrow of God, by the developer 111%.
Yeah, I had no idea.
And I didn't think I would have that much fun with it, because 111%, they're one of these mobile developers, and they've made different games that I've liked sort of to different extents. They make stuff that feels like sometimes a little bit junky, and then sometimes, it seems like they put like a lot of effort into something and made it really interesting. And it's an online multiplayer like automatic shooting archery game where you have to activate abilities and move your character to the left and to the right, and you play in real time with other people, and you're trying to not get whacked by arrows while you're doing your combination of abilities. And I started playing it, and I thought, oh, okay, this is not bad. And then really early hit a point where I was like, okay, this just feels kind of like random, and it just feels like if you've got better stuff, you win. Mm-hmm. And then I sort of hit the second point where I had enough stuff, almost like Injustice, that I could mess around with, where I was able to start making meaningful choices about how I was using abilities and in what order I was using them and what timing. And I would see somebody else, like I would fight somebody else, and they would just absolutely wreck me. And I would look at what abilities they used and how they were using them and go, oh, couldn't I do that? That would be cool. And then I got sets of stuff myself, and I ended up making sort of a combination of abilities that I hadn't actually seen anybody else use, but ended up being really effective. And so it ended up being in a lot of ways very similar to sort of gear loadouts in Injustice,
right?
Where you can pick a bow that has abilities, and then you can pick, I think it's 5 abilities that each have their own sort of cooldowns, and you can sort of mix and match those. And I found it quite satisfying, and I like it a lot because it is real online. Sometimes I have to wait a little while for a match, which is not the best. Right. But because it's real online, it adds sort of an extra edge to when you're playing and when you're really kicking something's butt. It's not like,
it's more satisfying.
AI, yeah, that it's like you're actually kicking someone else's butt. And there was also, I happened to get it in and around Chinese New Year, and they did a thing where they gave a bunch of their in-game premium currency away for Chinese New Year, like an actual like significant amount. So I got like a bunch of sort of rewards that let me play around with stuff, which is almost felt like sort of the same fast forwarding the early game content that we got from Injustice when we started using glitches for it.
Right.
So I found that pretty fun, and I actually go back and forth to it And it's pretty good. It's got a lot of support. They keep updating it on a pretty regular basis.
How old is it?
I don't know. It's still... I don't know when it came out. I haven't had it for very long. But I find it kind of a surprising amount of fun for the type of game. For how simple the mechanics were. And for how grindy it seemed like it might be, it's turned out to be a lot better than I thought it was going to be. And so that's a game that I have played recently. And I, bounce around to other stuff. I've done different things at different times. Another game that I played recently that doesn't have a ton of replay value was Stick War Legacy, which has been a good one, which is sort of like a tower defense game, where you're just you're earning money around your home base and then buying units and then sending them to try to bust other towers. And it's like the mobile updated version of like a Flash game that I liked a lot when I was a lot younger. So there's stuff here and there. But not a lot of stuff that I would sort of unambiguously recommend other people. I just sort of bounce around back and forth. Right. And there's different stuff. I always have fondness for some series too, like Bloons Tower Defense. They make some really good mobile games, and they're not free. You have to pay for them up front. And I think there are some in-app purchases that are optional in it, but I find that there's a lot of fun in there for the amount that it costs for getting it, and I find that a quite good game. And I think that's the only stuff that I'm playing right now.
So I'm curious about those games that you mentioned too. What's their revenue model? How are they making money?
Mostly in-app purchases. Okay. Right, for almost everything.
Because it's funny, you mentioned too that they're still supporting and stuff, and for the first, 6 years, we could have said the same thing about Injustice. Yeah. That's why I was curious about how old that game was.
Yeah, I don't know how old it is. I know they also have, planned rollouts, so there's, they have buttons on their menu for, a 2v2 mode that if you click on it, it just says coming soon. And so, yeah, no, there's a lot of good games. If you want something arcadey, that's just really, really fun. I think I mentioned it not that long ago when I was talking about the mechanics of games. The Downwell is really, really fun. Right. I have a lot of love for that game. I believe that one is also $3-something, but it's well worth it if you like sort of arcade, more sort of fast reflex stuff.
Right. Oh. I guess way back when I used to be interested. I like Firefly as a TV show. I like Serenity as a movie. Yeah. There was a Firefly mobile game called Big Damn Heroes. Yeah. And it was supposed to be a prelude to, I think, another online game that they're going to have. And so this was the way, Fallout had the mobile game that was, actually,
Fallout Shelter, yeah.
The same way that Injustice was the mobile game was supposed to be support for the Injustice console game. Mm-hmm. And they never came out with it, but they were pushing it pretty hard. Or maybe they did and I just stopped paying attention. But they were pushing it pretty hard. And I actually thought, the mobile game by itself was kind of fun. It was a little grindy. And I did, I actually spent some of my Google credits on it. Wow. Buying some stuff. And I think I was, despite them never sort of delivering, I was still kind of satisfied with it. Because what's funny is it's got the same thing as Injustice to me. It's got that, clearly the gameplay matters to you. And for me, there's an element of the associations and nostalgia that's probably just as, or maybe even more important. Because I'm sure there could be another game that does all that stuff, but it's what it reminds me of more than the gameplay itself that's important.
Yeah, I find tie-in games are actually really interesting. There was the one that I remember most for tie-in games is
what's a tie-in game?
Tie-in games.
Tie-in. I thought you said time games. I thought what?
So Dying Light had a tie-in companion app. Okay. Where all you did, it was basically just like a timer simulator, where you would collect heroes and send them out on missions, and they would take damage and bring back loot, and you would get a mix of loot that was for the game itself. So, for example, you get a flashlight that you could use to send them out on a higher level mission that you would need resources to send them out on, and you'd get money for the game itself, and you would use money to heal your heroes. But then part of the loot that you would get would actually be resources that you could send back to Dying Light itself. And that really, it's interesting because I don't understand what the actual value to Dying Light was to have it, but what it did just let you do is just sort of break the in-game collecting economy, where you could just send back a bunch of like materials into the other game for a game that for itself its gameplay loop, like it clearly there was no value in the game itself past just sending money into the actual real game.
Was the mobile game easier then to generate resource?
Well, it was passive to generate resources.
Oh,
so
okay.
you send them out and there's no gameplay. You just pick a mission,
right?
Pick the people that you want to put on it.
Then you wait.
And send them out. And so there was some light mechanics. They had 2 stats. There was a running stat and a combat stat, just like the real game. And there was running missions and combat missions. And the way that it would work is that you have sort of limited health, right? And your characters can actually die if you send them out on too many missions. Right. So you need a certain amount of stats in either running or combat. But every time they would level up, they would get all of their health back. And you have a limited number of levels. I think it was 20 was the maximum number of levels. So early on, when you don't have a lot of money and you don't have enough money to heal everybody, you'd have to sort of balance people out in how they leveled, because each consecutive level for combat or running would take way more stat points.
Right.
But then the later you got into the game, you would want people with really high points for just the type of mission that they were going on. Right. But then you would, hit your level cap, and you would essentially have people who were balanced out, but who weren't actually good enough to go on the high level missions for either. So there was sort of that little bit of like, it was the lightest management elements to it. That was otherwise just really for getting in-game resources for Dying Light. And, I think that contrasts really sort of strongly with what we see for Injustice, right? Where this is really like 90% a game to stand on its own.
Right.
And then like that last sort of tiny little, like the WBID mixed unlock thing, which really was more of like just a nod to the fact that they were technically supposed to be linked. Right. Than any sort of meaningful rewards for one or the other.
You know what that reminds me of? It's like those, you might be too young to remember this, but when they had successful TV shows, especially comedies, they would make spin-off shows. But the spin-off would most often be not like Frasier, right? Frasier was actually, you take a key character, the first show is over, and then he gets his own show because he's got his own world to live in. Yeah. What they would do is, they would have the show, they would introduce a brand new character for like one episode, or like a really short story arc, and then, you've got a new show.
Really?
So, Mork and Mindy was a spin-off of Happy Days. Yeah. Mork wasn't important to Happy Days. He was nobody. He just showed up. And then they spun him off. And my memory might be failing me. I might be getting something wrong, but there used to be tons of shows like this. Mm-hmm. Where, it's a spin-off from this new successful show, but it had nothing to do with it. It would be somebody that would show up one time, see you later, now their world is another show.
So it was more just like cross-marketing.
Yes. It's like those comic book series where they would have like different comic books. You'd have to read the different comic books to follow the entire story, and it would be a really big, wieldy. I feel like one of the biggest kind of crossovers things that was successful that I remember was Secret Wars, but it wasn't so much that way, because you could read Secret Wars in its entirety in the self-contained limited series. Yeah. And then there would be repercussions in the other issues, but nothing, you weren't missing anything if you didn't read all the other comics. Mm. However, something like, say, I'm dating myself here, Millennium, which DC did, which was all their different titles, and they would tie them in, and there would be, each week, there would be different stories that were tied into this whole big overarching storyline. Yeah.
What I think is interesting about having to read a bunch of different stuff and sort of read everything that's out in that group at the time is it speaks to like a really sort of interesting feeling when you're going through media, which is when there is a lot of stuff tied in and it almost has a built-in sort of expiry date for experiencing it in the ideal way, because there's a lot of media that is tied into everything else at the time and is sort of linked in a meaningful way, and you lose a lot of the ancillary stuff that's supposed to be connected with time. Where if you're coming back to it, right? Maybe you have a series, and there's like, promotional material that's out, that's like in universe, and you have, other stuff where you're furthering the story in like, like a web comic or whatever, or you've got multiple places that you're posting different things, or you've got multiple streams to follow. If you have comic books now where you have to read all of the comics that were coming out back then, it would be almost impossible to figure out what you needed to read to get the full story now. Going back, if you're saying like this person's story and this person's story, and you have to read, like all these heroes together,
right?
The order that you're supposed to consume content in, for a lot of that is probably lost to time, right? Like it would be really, really challenging to pick up all the threads and read it in the order and the way that people intended, where it really was, built and meant to be experienced as it was happening. Yeah. And then it was easy to watch back then because it was just when it was coming out. And I can't think of too many examples for that. The one that I can think of right now is Carboys, the Polygon series, where they had a bunch of stuff in other videos. They sort of had it filtered in, and they had other like stuff that was not part of the main series, and just everything that was posted for a little while. There was like a good chance that it would tie in an unexpected way, even in an unrelated video, just for a few moments. And I think there's something really interesting and appealing about stuff that was old enough that it can still get lost. Because I don't think it happens the same way anymore. And I think sometimes it does, and people have tried to replicate that in different ways. And I think there is a lot of nostalgia for that. For like, you talk about video games like cheat codes and secrets, right? Where you would have discussions about secrets, but there was no way of doing it except doing it yourself.
Yeah, there's sometimes if something was around long enough, they'd write books about it. There'd be people who would actually, when you think of how long it takes to actually write, edit, publish a book, that would never happen now. The stuff gets disseminated so quickly, right?
Yeah, there would be like rumors or stories, and people would talk about it, and you'd sort of get that broken telephone discussion. And the thing that I'm thinking about now, actually, for somebody who tried to do that is, I don't know if you know about frog fractions.
No, I don't.
I'll tell you.
Okay.
This is a good diversion because we don't have that many comments, and we can save these for next week if we do. So Frog Fractions is a game. If you haven't played Frog Fractions, stop watching the video and go play it and come back because it's free. The first Frog Fractions is free. And I'm going to talk about the first Frog Fractions, and it's free, it's online, and it's better to play it without knowing what it is. And stick with it, it's worth it, and it only takes like a couple hours.
The only frog, every time you say frog video game, I always think Frogger. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So Frog Fractions is styled like old Flash games.
Okay.
Like coolmathgames.com style stuff, where it's like supposed to be this like thing that's like loosely educational, that's not that fun as a game and not that educational as a thing, but it's the kind of like educational game that like you might be allowed to play like in computer class in like elementary school, and that's what it's trying to ape. And so it pretends that it's trying to teach you about fractions,
right?
And you're using a frog, and you're putting your tongue out, and you're like knocking flies out of the air, and the flies have fractions written on them. Right. And so there's no educational content because they're just fractions are happening. They're just fractions in the game.
Right.
And there's sort of nothing. And the game...
It's actually the opposite if you think about it, because instead of actually associating any meaning to the fractions, they're just there.
Yeah, it's just
dressing.
Yeah, so it's sort of got this like weird funny tone, and then you start getting upgrades so that your frog can do stuff better, and then you do better math. And it eventually just totally falls apart in a really entertaining way, where it becomes a parody of a bunch of different genres of game. There's a section where you're adventuring, and it's just sort of like an exploratory game. There is a whole text adventure portion, where you're literally like playing like Zork, where you're writing in text stuff and solving puzzles in a text adventure game. And it goes through, and I don't even remember all the things that it does, but it goes to a bunch of different places, and it is just this sort of love letter to specific game genres and specific types of stuff, and it's sort of wrapped up in this funny... There's like a management simulator at the end. There's a like courtroom dialogue, like visual novel section where you have to like answer like questions in front of like a fly court because you've been like eating all the flies and stuff. Like it's really weird and unique and fun. And the creator of the game made a Kickstarter for Frog Fractions 2.
Right.
And for the Kickstarter, what he wanted to do was he wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to recapture what he did with Frog Fractions 1. He didn't want people to know exactly what to expect going in.
Right.
And he didn't want people to just go, oh, well, I'm coming to this for like a fun parody game. Like part of it was sort of the framing device and how people experienced it. And so to sort of recapture that old style of not really, not experiencing things in a way where you could just like look up a guide or a walkthrough. What he actually did was, the Kickstarter, when you bought it, there was a tier where you could buy a key for the game. And he said, after you support this Kickstarter, I'm not going to give you any updates. I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on. I'm not going to tell you what the game is going to be like. And then I will release the game, and I'm not going to tell anybody about it either. And what I will tell you is the game will not be called Frog Fractions 2. It will be somewhere on the internet, and it will look like something. And it will exist out there in the world. And when the jig is up, when people have figured out what Frog Fractions 2 is and where it is, and I consider the jig being up when like major like game like websites start like posting like articles about like people found Frog Fractions 2.
Yeah.
That's when I will give you, as a Kickstarter backer, your key. And if you think you know where Frog Fractions 2 is, you before I do that, you can also email me and contact me, and if you get it right, I'll send you the key. But up until then, Frog Fractions 2 will be a mystery, and it'll exist somewhere on the internet, and you will just have to find it.
That is cool. That makes me think of Ready Player One, like that treasure hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he put hints in different places, and it ended up releasing, this is a spoiler for the Frog Fractions 2 game, but it ended up releasing as part of a game called Glittermitten Grove, where there was, it's like a little resource management game that's like styled after like fairies. And if you got to a certain point, there was ways within the game to get into Frog Fractions 2.
Right.
And you would hit a point, and then it would become Frog Fractions 2. And just that experience struck me as really interesting and really cool. And it's funny because he made Frog Fractions 3, which he considers Frog Fractions 4, because he released a free version for Steam of the original Frog Fractions. And there was a DLC hat in it that was a couple bucks you could pay, and it was just a hat, and it was like, it just doesn't do anything in the game. And apparently if you equip the hat and do something in the version, like the Steam version of Frog Fractions, it becomes like the new Frog Fractions game. But so he does all these little things that are sort of meant to be like things that people can discover. And even though once it's out, you know, obviously I didn't have to participate in that story to know the story of it now.
Right.
And anybody who's watched this video has just heard a version of the story without having to actually participate in the original thing happening. But those are the same sort of time-sensitive things where he's making these little experiences where there's a short amount of time, where there's a real scarcity of information, where people actually have to figure out stuff for themselves, and where there's a little bit of sort of mystery and mystique that isn't just, that you can't just like look up the Wikipedia page for it and find it.
Because not just you not knowing, it's you not knowing this time and not knowing if or when somebody will know.
Yeah. And so he has Frog Fractions 3 out, but it's funny because I saw an article where he actually says that he considers it Frog Fractions 4 because he thinks that the first one was Frog Fractions 1, and then the Kickstarter, up until people finding Frog Fractions 2, he considers the second game. Right? Is people figuring out where it was and participating in like the clues that he let out and stuff, and he considers that actually the second Frog Fractions experience.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be said for those little sort of things that make you feel like you're participating in something bigger, and things that make you feel like you don't have all the information and you can't get it so easy.
Yeah. So that is the answer to the question, is Arkham Knight Batman available in Phantom Zone?
There we go. So that's our own little information scarcity thing, tucked away at the end of this video.
I mean, I think he's shown it once before, but it keeps getting asked so much, and we didn't really bring attention to it when it happened the first time. So it's happened twice now in I guess almost a couple years of playing.
Yeah, I don't even know how we got on this topic, but there we go. That's information about Frog Fractions 2, a game. And I played Frog Fractions 1. I didn't even really play much of Frog Fractions 2. I own it. But I just thought the story was so cool, and it's hard to make things that are cool to participate in nowadays,
right.
and craft those experiences.
Right. Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
There we go. Okay, so that was our video this week. We'd like to give a few shout-outs to people, say thanks to folks for supporting us. So first off, we have a shout-out to Eliza the Breadless Caton. It's Passover, so she's gluten-free right now. Can't have wheat. This shout-out was brought to you by A Yearning for Yeast.
So does that mean no beer?
I don't actually know specifically what she's not allowed to have, but she's
No
not allowed
soy
to have
sauce.
bread.
That's got
Certain
gluten
types
in
of
it.
bread.
Ah.
I think you can have
Unleavened
matzah.
bread. You have to
I
have
don't know.
unleavened bread.
Is it? But I don't know the specific rules.
Beer. That's what you need. You need beer.
Anyways, we'd also like to give a thank you to all the wonderful people who support us on Patreon.
And that would be Consul Peasant and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest tier, Last Word. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo, who are supporting us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2for1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
Here we go. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.